Our last speaker is Jana Kozeka. Jana is at George Mason University in Washington. And what is really important, I would like to say something, is that Jana is from Slovakia. And she actually moved to robotics after attending a talk by Rosena. I read this on her Wikipedia page. And this is a great lesson about the value of having great people guiding you and a model to follow. And this is also, in this case, a lesson in diversity. Thank you very much, Rosena, and thank you, Jana, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. So again, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a true honor for me to speak at this event, and thanks for organizers for putting together a wonderful event, as well as the other speakers. So I have been sort of straddling these boundaries between computer vision and robotics or robot perception. So I would like to give you a little bit of a perspective from computer vision, and more specifically, these large vision language models of where we are, and also a little bit of a brief history of the field. So, and I'm going to sort of do it through the lens of sort of finding and looking for objects in the environment. So, without a doubt, the ability of finding an object and localizing them is very important for situational awareness of robots and for many tasks. So for navigations, it is important to be able to avoid objects or decide whether you can push them away or whether you need to avoid. It is important to recognize landmarks or people. So these are sort of commonly encountered objects in autonomous driving. It is very also important for object manipulation, object rearrangements, and various sort of fetch and delivery tasks in service robotics. And it is also an important ingredient for the interface between task planning and actual execution. And so this is a kind of a simple example of setting the table tasks, where you can, with ease these days, prompt the ChatGPT what it takes to set the table, and you'll get sort of quite detailed instructions of what are the individual steps, what are the objects involved. So this is an output of a language model. And then the question is, what do we need to do to actually realize this, right? So we need to be able to find the objects, recognize them, decide what are the places where we can pick them and place them, and so forth. So, so I'm going to look at this problem through the lens of the levels of supervision we have been given to these machine learning systems, which have made sort of tremendous headlines in the past decade or so. So since the advent of deep learning, this really sort of changed how we approach the problem of learning representations, and also how do we specify and design architectures for various tasks. And in computer vision, there was a large effort in the early days of deep learning to use a large data sets which were labeled at different levels of detail in order to formulate the supervised learning tasks. So it started with the ImageNet, where you would have one label per image, and that was just the category. And then we sort of gradually moved to object detection, where you would have the actual bounding boxes for the labels of the individual object categories or instances, all the way to segmentations, where the desire was to actually predict the segmentation masks, either for objects or sort of full semantic segmentation of the image. And if you can see, as the level of supervision increased, the data set became smaller and smaller, because it was much more laborious to actually obtain and label these data sets, which were very carefully curated and labeled by humans. So for ImageNet, we would have 10 million images, but when we moved to object detection, the initial data sets were only 200,000, and then 200 and then even less for semantic segmentation. But in this process, this led to the development of a lot of different architectures and algorithmic approaches how to tackle these problems. And here are some sort of representative examples of architectures for image classification, object detection, or semantic segmentation. And sort of as the field progressed, these sort of advances also translated to robotics, and we were able to attain fairly good performing systems for object detection or semantic segmentation, both for 2D images, but also integrating this information across multiple views to actually get semantic labeling for 3D environments, where the range of the categories and concepts we could label were on the order of 10, so maybe anywhere from sort of 20 to 30 categories for object, non-object categories, but the number of categories then was sort of increasing. And these models were these specially designed architectures which had around sort of 40 to 60 million parameters. So around the same time, we have sort of marked somewhat in parallel big advances in self-supervised learning. So this was mostly driven by natural language processing community and also the invention of the so-called transformer architecture. And this really enabled both on the natural language side and then was also adopted by vision community to completely change sort of the data strategy for these learning problems. And without requiring the detailed level of supervision, one could use very large amounts of data to learn the basic representations, both for images and natural language, and then use very small number of labeled data for specific tasks. And so here are sort of some early attempts for learning language representations. This was the so-called BERT model, and was using the idea of masked language modeling. And this, you can think of it as some kind of more advanced representations for translating words to high-dimensional vectors. And similar idea was then explored on the image side using the so-called mask autoencoders or another sort of popular model in this category, so-called Dino. So, and this again spawned a lot of effort to now, so having these developments sort of separate at the language and vision community, this spawned a lot of efforts to actually try to do this multimodal modeling, where again, using these masked language modeling ideas, the vision and language modalities would interact early on through some really weak levels of supervision using only image and caption pairs. And the typical tasks at that time that were sort of considered were this visual question answering, captioning, referring expression detections, and so forth. But the disadvantage of this generation of the models was that every specific task then required training a specific task head, which required then detailed labeled data. So another sort of important, I guess, milestone in this sort of data and self-supervised learning or multimodal learning revolution was this vision language model, CLIP, which used extremely large data sets for image and caption pairs for pre-training vision and language representations in a way that they were aligned. And what was surprising about the model that the consequent testing of the model yield superior performance on the 27 out of sort of tens of computer vision data sets in basically a zero-shot setting. So you could then prompt the model with the language prompts where the classification would be formulated as a problem of aligning a prompt, say, this is a photo of a Cocker Spaniel with the image, and the most likely prompt was determined then the category. So this is just kind of a quick look what happened at the scale level. So the early data sets such as Flickr and Coco, which were on the order of 400 or 200,000 images, sort of shifted to the data sets of image caption pairs, which were of several orders of magnitude larger. And this was the Lion data set, which was used to train the CLIP model. And then in parallel, there was a lot of development in both the language models and the vision language models, which varied in their size, their architectures, and ways of pre-training the model. So all of these models initially used only image caption pairs as a level of supervision, and then there were a lot of methodologies developed for probing and understanding these models, and very early on, it became apparent that a lot of the representations and the models have some challenges, and so here are some highlighting some of the challenges. So the models had the real challenge of actually being able to comprehend spatial relationships, so it couldn't really tell whether a caption, the bed is next to the bicycle, is actually true or false, or whether it's bed behind the bicycle, and so forth. It had trouble with compositionality, so it was very hard to tell for the model to tell apart whether the truck, whether this is a fire truck or whether it is a truck on fire, right? So in many instances, these models ended up behaving as just a simple bag of word models. And so this spawned another line of work where people sort of started thinking how to actually add additional levels of supervision, which we were sort of very accustomed in computer vision literature, where there were a lot of labeled and carefully curated data set. And this sort of led to developments that showed that actually high quality data and good level of supervision can dramatically improve performance of these models, and the smaller models actually perform much better than the larger models. So I think the message still remains that there is sort of this continuum between the quality of the data and the level of supervision, which can dramatically sort of affect the performance of these models. And this is just sort of highlighting that the ability of the model to actually ground certain concepts, such as the head of the child, sort of varies dramatically depending on the training objectives. So another important advancement in this space, and this advancement comes more from these bottom-up techniques, again comes with a lot of effort spent in curated high-quality data. In this case, it was high-quality data for the bottom-up segmentation tasks, where there were about 1 billion object masks that were used to train this bottom-up segmentation method. And this is the so-called segment anything model, which can very clearly sort of detect the boundaries between different objects and different parts. And then this model, combined with the promptable language model, can then yield sort of this open vocabulary detection, where you can effectively detect majority of the objects which you can currently encounter in these indoors environments. So in computer vision, many of these detection problems these days tend to be open vocabulary problems. So you can basically prompt the model to look for things you are interested in detecting and naming. Of course, there are some sort of accuracy issues which are related to the specificity of the concepts you are looking for. So the second generation of these language models came from, again, the effort to actually incorporate the generative component of the language model into this vision language model in the very spirit of ChatGPT, where instead of training the models where the interactions between vision and language modality happens sort of early on, the idea was to simply take the best performing language model, take the best performing vision model, and simply learn these connector modules where the representations or embedding spaces where the visual representations live are connected to the spaces where the language representation live. And so you are basically learning how to map the visual informations into the prefix of the language model, and then additioned with the text, then you can follow with the generation component. So the exciting part of this development was that now you can interact with these vision language models in the free natural language. You do not have to have specific heads for individual tasks because the tasks themselves are specified as a part of the prompt. And here are some examples how some of this prompting looks like. So you can say, oh, given an image, tell me what is the spatial relationship between the two views and so forth. So again, from the robotics perspective, it is often not the case that you can use these models in a zero-shot setting and expect a good performance. However, there are effective methodologies, which I encourage all of you to explore, is how to actually fine-tune this model using a data which is specific for robotics application. And a lot of the mechanisms which are being used are using so-called visual instruction tuning methodologies, where you can sort of present a lot of instructions in the form of image and the text pairs to the model in order to improve the performance on a variety of tasks, be vision question answering or grounding or others. And another important component is, of course, understanding the 3D information and how to sort of ingest or represent the 3D information in order for the models to perform satisfactorily on 3D tasks. And here, again, there is a big role of supervised learning techniques where you can use the traditional supervised learning techniques to actually generate data for training data for these large models in order to improve the performance. So another use of these vision language models, which sort of has been sort of quite prominent recently, is this ability to represent and extract some common sense knowledge, which is both present in images and represented in the language models themselves. And this has been very useful for the problems related to object search. So for example, imagine that you're trying to find an object, but the object is not currently in view, and you need to decide which direction to take. And so here one can prompt the models with the prompts, like a couple examples of these prompts are, how likely can I find some object while I'm seeing the other object? How likely am I to find an oven given this view, without really needing to specify that view has a kitchen or so forth. And so these representations can be then used for designing reward functions for reinforcement learning, because you can actually numerically quantify these likelihoods of making different decisions at this sort of higher level, while the low-level strategies are then sort of carried out using some sort of more elementary robotic skills for local navigation. And so we have used these techniques for frontier-based navigation to point goals and object goals, where we use the language models or some other learning-based techniques to characterize the properties or rewards of the individual frontiers, which then let us to decide which frontier is more likely to lead to the goal. And I'll just sort of tie to another example, which is considered frequently in the sort of embodied AI as viewed by computer vision community, and this is the so-called vision and language navigation problem. So here, the goal is, given some set of instructions, the goal is to actually follow the sort of come up with the commands in order to reach the goal. And again, here the ability to ground the objects, it's quite important. And with the increasing improvements in the quality of detecting and grounding the objects in these large language models, this is also going to significantly impact the advancement in this class of problems. So I will probably leave you with a couple parting thoughts. So these vision and language models are becoming more and more powerful, and there are a lot of opportunities to use them effectively in the context of robotics applications. They're often do not perform very well in zero-shot setting, but there are opportunities to fine-tune or adapt these models to the tasks which are relevant. I mean, we have been mostly thinking about it in the context of service robotics, but I think there are other opportunities as well. The ability to interact with the models in natural language, I think there's a great benefit in order to improving the human interactions, giving instructions, specifying goals, and actually giving supervision in natural language. So this is sort of a big qualitative step from the levels of supervision we had to have early on in computer vision communities, where you had to sort of label carefully the individual objects and pixels in order to provide the supervisions for supervised learning. High quality data matters, and high quality data which is specific to robotics application is really key. And while the initial push was really driven through the self-supervised techniques, good and high level of supervision is also critical. And so these are sort of a lot of open avenues which people are currently exploring. And we are constantly developing new evaluation metrics and methodologies, because often the previous ones sort of are not suitable for this type of models. And another thing which I guess I resonate with some of the previous speakers, that every case we encounter in robotics is an end case. It's a long-tail distribution case. But there are a lot of opportunities to use these methodologies to actually work on specific environments as opposed to trying to generalize for every environment. And these methodologies are these interactive methodologies through humans and natural language instructions, specifying goals for tasks, and so forth. Okay, so that's all I have. Thank you.
So we are really out of time, and I'm sorry. I mean, if you have one very quick question to Jana. Otherwise, I would say, okay, go ahead. I saw you first. Very quick, because we have to move to the break.
Thanks for the great talk. What you were showing is basically something which you can use for image retrieval and for information retrieval. Robotics is about measurements. So it feels like we've given up measuring to finding similarities to measurements during training. Do you think there is a necessity to actually combine classical methods with learning methods to apply it in robotics to have accurate measurements again?
So,
short.
Yes. So it is actually, this is definitely one of the concerns.
Get away.
So
I have a message to you.
Yeah. There are mechanisms how to incorporate quantitative and qualitative types of measurements in these models. But here, I was kind of trying to highlight this ability to interact with these models in natural language. But you can actually train these models or incorporate this quantitative information within the models. Because at the end of the day, the distances could easily be tokens which could be generated and then correctly assessed if the data which you provide to the model is the right one for your environment.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you again, Jana.